this is all about science for Copenhagen, right? But like Copenhagen is not really about science. It's about like trying to actually get a bunch of people to sit down at the table together and like actually hash out some kind of negotiations and maybe put some sort of actual commitments on it where they actually have to do these things. And so I recognize that like the amount that science is actually going to play in that whole process could be potentially really small. Like, so how, I mean, is science actually even going to come into play at all? And I think this really got highlighted this weekend, right? And Alicia sent this out to the whole team that like Copenhagen is now looking like a stepping stone towards something else, because people like, there's not ready yet. There's no, Alicia and I were talking about it over the weekend, and I was like, there's no like higher authority out there that's like, okay, you guys, your homework's due this December and you have to get it done. Like, we just can't do it because there's nobody there making us, because that's just how it is. And it's scary because I think there's a huge gap between where the science says we should be and what we should be doing and what is the reality. And so I wanted you guys to like keep that framework in mind as we talk about the science and try to, especially in the light of like me being here from a science perspective talking, and then Jesse in 2 weeks, like, could like what I'm talking about and what Jesse's going to talk about, could we even like sit down and have a conversation together, like, or is there like there's a gap there? And so like let's be thinking about like, yeah, what's in that space between the science and the policy. And like I'm trying to make this as policy relevant as possible, but like scientists are scientists in terms of like what the numbers and the information that they're putting out there, and it's the translating it to the policy is proving really difficult. So I think that's just something to like everyone to keep in mind as we're talking about this. How is this going to work? So yeah, my goal for this talk was like try to take all the science that's out there and only talk about the relevant stuff that's actually going to apply. And there's a very small chunk of it that's actually going to apply. And I don't want this to be like sort of in its own little black box, completely disconnected to what's going on in Copenhagen. And so with that in mind, I think the only way that the science is going to apply to Copenhagen is that the politicians and the negotiators want to know, like, what is the bare minimum that we have to do to avoid the very worst. Like, what, I mean, nobody wants to do anything more than the very bare minimum, and we probably aren't even going to do the bare minimum. So really they're talking about, like, what can we do to avoid dangerous climate change, right? And I think that's where the science can actually contribute. And there's sort of two parts to this. So first, defining what is dangerous climate change, and then saying, science-wise, where do we have to be with CO2 in the atmosphere to keep ourselves under that threshold. So those are going to be sort of the two main focuses of the talk. What is dangerous climate change? How do we define it? And then also, what have we got to do to keep ourselves below it? Because anything, like, we're not going above and beyond here. That's like totally out the window. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so. Yeah, okay, so slide 5. Here we are. What is dangerous climate change? And so the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, commits the people that sign that framework, the countries that sign it, to stabilizing greenhouse gases in the atmosphere at a level that prevents what they call dangerous anthropogenic influence to the climate system. So that's the goal. That's the UNFCCC. Yeah. And so here's how they define making progress towards that goal of preventing dangerous anthropogenic interference. Oh. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So first, the ecosystems can adapt naturally to climate change. And you guys all have this in your PowerPoint too. Second, that food production isn't threatened. And that third, that economic development can proceed in a sustainable manner. So this is looking at it from sort of a positive perspective. Like, here's the things that, the 3 goals that the UNFCCC wants to maintain. Ecosystems adapting, food being produced, and economic development happening in a sustainable way. Okay, and so then the IPCC in 2001, the 3rd assessment report, took this and they tried to put some parameters on how to define dangerous climate change. What is it? Yeah. And so they came up with, we're on slide 5, guys. So these 5 reasons for concern, RFCs. And they didn't say either one of them is more important than the other one. They just said, here's 5 ways of trying to get our hands around what is dangerous climate change. So the first one is risks to unique and threatened systems. And those include, these all make sense, right? Coral reefs, tropical glaciers, endangered species, unique ecosystems, biodiversity hotspots, small island states, and indigenous communities. So that's one. We can all get that. Risk of extreme weather events, heat waves, floods, droughts, wildfires, and hurricanes. The 3rd one is the distribution of these impacts. Is it just affecting certain geographic areas, or is it everywhere? How widespread is it? The 4th one is aggregate impacts, where they try to take all these different impacts and sum them into like one metric, and mostly they're using money. How much money is this costing in terms of damage that we're paying for? You can also, there's other metrics that they're starting to use now, which is like human health and lives lost, but money is often the main thing they're using as an aggregate. And then the 5th one is risk of large-scale discontinuities, which is a fancy way of saying crossing serious tipping points and screwing ourselves in a big way. So ice sheet collapse and slowing down that thermohaline circulation.
Were those the only 2 that they mentioned as large-scale discontinuity?
I'd guess like permafrost melt and methane release. There's other, but those are the 2 big ones that they're thinking of. Can you think of any others?
That was the other one that I was thinking of.
Yeah. Okay, so these are the sort of 5 metrics that we're trying to use to define what defines dangerous. And in a lot of these you see this word risk coming up. Hi, Christine. So I wanted to take a minute and talk about what is risk, right? So what is risk, you guys? What makes something risky?
Something bad could happen.
Matt LePay, you can't answer this because we've talked about this way too much.
Never mind.
So if you're going to go out there and do a risky activity, what makes it risky?
Potential negative consequences.
Okay, so the consequences are one thing, right? Yeah, how bad are the consequences, right?
Percentage of them happening.
Totally.
Likely they to happen.
Right, so the probability that they are going to happen. Consequences times the probability, right? Because something is extremely risky if it's really bad what's going to happen and there's a really good chance it's going to happen. It's less risky both if the consequences aren't so bad and if, like flying in a plane is sort of risky, right? But like, what are the chances that something bad's going to happen? Pretty small, but if they did happen, they'd be terrible. Matt and I used to talk a lot about, which one was the example we used?
He's talking about skydiving.
Skydiving, yeah, right? Like, low probability, high consequence. That's also like what a lot of scientists talk about, like shutdown of the thermohaline circulation is a low probability, high consequence event. Happens, we're all screwed, very small chance it's going to happen in the next 500 years. Okay, so this like assessment can get used for any kind of risk. Like when you go backcountry skiing, right? It's like you're constantly assessing like, what would be the consequences if there's an avalanche, or in like, what are the chances that it's going to happen? And, like we do it all the time for like every decision that we make. Mm-hmm. And you can do it for risks involving climate change too. Both the specific ones, like risks of hurricanes or losing ice in the Arctic or losing a particular species. What are the consequences of it, and what are the chances it's going to happen? But also you can do it with the big picture of temperature rise, like thinking of what temperature rise do we want to draw the line at and stop there.